Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, we don't have a football game to go to this weekend, and I kind of don't know what to do with myself. It's like, well, that should chew up 12 hours of my Saturday. What am I supposed to do if I don't have a football game to go to? I don't understand.
I'm sure you'll find something to do that will fill the day just as fully as you would have if you had football to do. So I'm not too worried about you, Tom. Me, I've got to figure out my television schedule, my viewing, what do I want to watch on the one TV versus the other TV? Do I need something on my phone? I am a wreck, Tom, trying to figure out how I'm going to spend my Saturday not going anywhere. And I don't get many of these. I'm already foolishly looking forward to next year when there are possibly two bye weeks. I don't know that you need to wish away a year looking forward to two bye weeks, but we don't get many of these. We only get, we get like 40 of them, technically.
Yeah, it turns out there are a lot of Saturdays without college football, and you spend most of those wishing that college football was here. So let's not wish away the time when college football is here, please.
No, and so what we've got today, no games going on, so we're going to tackle some listener questions, recap what everybody's talking about, wondering about, thinking about. So let's just go ahead and get this thing started, Tom.
All right, let's start with this one from @2007MLR. Is there a scenario where a one-loss Ohio State Big Ten champ is left out of the college football playoff? And Tony, I started thinking, boy, well, is there? And then it was like, oh yeah, this is actually pretty straightforward. There are still 27, I think, unbeaten teams in FBS right now. A one-loss Big Ten champion, Ohio State, is not getting left out for a undefeated non-power conference champion, but they absolutely could if there are four undefeated power conference champions among the other four conferences. In this scenario, of course, Ohio State is the Big Ten champion, so there is no other undefeated Big Ten champ. But there could very easily be, say, an undefeated Georgia, an undefeated Texas, an undefeated Florida State, and an undefeated fill in the blank, Washington, Oregon, USC, whoever you want to, Utah, whoever you put in from the Pac-12. Any of those teams, an undefeated SEC champ is not getting left out. A Texas undefeated team that won on the road at Alabama is not getting left out. An undefeated Florida State that beat LSU on a neutral field is not getting left out. And whoever runs the gauntlet in the Pac-12 this year, if it's, say, Washington, they will have beaten Oregon. They will have, won a Pac-12 championship game against someone good, possibly Oregon again. They're not getting left out. So yes, there is absolutely a scenario where a one-loss Ohio State team gets left out, Big Ten champ. I don't think that's super likely to happen. It's possible, but the odds of all of those things happening, all of those teams running the table, Tony, what do I always say about the likelihood of a college football team running the table? Now multiply that times 4, and it feels like not that likely.
Yeah, not likely. And I'm just trying to scroll real quickly to see how many times, because I don't think it's happened where you've had four undefeated teams actually in the playoffs. And 2014, the first year you didn't. 2015, second year you didn't. Third year, no. Almost in 2018, Oklahoma was the lone one-loss team in there with Alabama, Clemson, and Notre Dame. One-loss team in 2019. 2020, you had 2. 2021, you had 3 of the 4, and then of course last year 2 of the 4. So no, but the scenario you laid out there is possible, very unlikely. But with the schedule that Georgia plays and then Texas plays, Texas obviously still has Oklahoma that's coming up. It's just going to be really difficult for me to imagine somebody coming out of the Pac-12 with just everything that they have. And Florida State wouldn't shock me if they're undefeated. So that's one. Georgia wouldn't shock me if they're undefeated. Texas wouldn't shock me either. So then it comes down to, you could also ask which of these programs, which of these teams with one loss would go in ahead of Ohio State with one loss. But we need to know who that loss is to. How have the other teams looked? Is Penn State just have one loss? Does Michigan just have one loss? Does Notre Dame stay at 10-2 or 11-1 rather than 7-5, something like that? So a bunch of scenarios there for comparing one-loss teams that we don't know how that would shake out. But certainly there is a road to be left out as a one-loss Big Ten champ, even though, Tom, I don't believe it has ever happened. Just a two-loss Big Ten champ being left out. Is that correct?
Didn't 2018 Ohio State get left out as a one-loss Big Ten champ?
I've made that mistake before.
My professional advice to Ohio State would be to not lose to a crappy Purdue team by 29 points this year, even if you are playing in the ancient Native American burial ground of Ross-Ade Stadium. I would advise they not lose by 29 points. That would be my suggestion, which will probably help shape the narrative around this year's Ohio State team. That's one of those things where if you lose to Michigan by 2 points in Ann Arbor and you're 11-1, and you get to the Big Ten championship game on the tiebreaker, which we talked about earlier, on a show a week or two ago about, being centered around the, if you get down to the fifth tiebreaker, if Penn State and Ohio State and Michigan are all have one loss in the conference, it's the winning percentage of the teams in the opposite division who you played. Ohio State is probably in the best shape of any one of those three teams based on their schedule. So, if Ohio State gets in to the Big Ten championship game and wins that, then they would probably still make it. I think there is the likelihood of those four teams being undefeated. I would say I would set the over/under on the number of those four other conference champions all being undefeated. I'd set the over/under at 2.5. Tony, what do you think? 2.5 of those other conference champions undefeated by the time the playoff selection committee is making the only decision that actually matters all year.
I'm going to have to go under just because 3 is a lot and 2 is fewer, Tom. That is how that works. We've seen it before, 3 undefeated teams. I think more often as I was just reading through that, it seemed like there are more 1-loss teams and 3-loss teams in there. So I would go ahead and assume that it's either going to be an equal number of 1-loss teams or more 1-loss teams. So I can't go over 2.5 on the undefeateds, even though are these great teams? I don't think there's a great team right now in college football, so that makes going undefeated even more difficult, other than the fact that you're not playing against necessarily any great teams as well, which could make it easier to go undefeated. It's going to require a little bit of what Ohio State did on Saturday, which is taking advantage of the breaks that your opponents give you. And if you can do that, you can maybe steal one on the road. And as we know, anytime you go undefeated, you're going to steal something from somebody at some point. And Ohio State got their theft done early. We'll see if they can do any stealing later on this season.
Yeah, that is not necessarily a you only need one situation. If you're old enough to remember the 2002 season, about half of that year was, oh boy, this is coming right down to the wire kind of games. I don't think it'll be that this year, but there are plenty of losable games, and Ohio State used up probably more than one of its 9 lives on Saturday night in South Bend. So we'll see if they can keep that up. Tony, let's help solve some of their problems right here from @Schwal55. Congratulations, Tony. You've been appointed czar of the off week. Boy, putting you in charge of a thing when nothing's happening seems about right. That was not actually in the question. That's just my own editorialization there. What is the most important thing, Tony, you would focus on for each side of the ball during the off week?
Busy work. Middle management. I've got a job to do. I need everybody to look busy because the boss is coming. So, offensively, we're going to talk about short yardage on, 3rd and 4th down. I just went back through before the show and looked at the number of 3rd and 4th downs, short yardage, which I consider 3rd and 3 or less, 4th and 3 or less. And over the first 4 games, they've run the ball on 14 of those situations. They've actually gotten first downs on 7 of those. Not bad. However, they were 4 for 4 against Western Kentucky. So you take that out, and they're 3 of 10 against everybody else, and that everybody else includes Indiana and Youngstown State. So still not a great mark there. And I think that needs to be the focus, or a focus, because what is the go-to? How teams have to have 2-point plays, and this is essentially kind of what we're talking about. What are your best short yardage plays? And I watched Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning when you had Ross Fulton on talking about the short yardage stuff, and it's something that we talked about after the game. I did not like going jumbo and bringing in all 11 defenders into the scrum because there's just nowhere to go. And it doesn't matter what kind of push you get. There's a pretty good likelihood that you're not going to be able to push everybody. You can't push a pile. You can push the guy in front of you, but when the pile gets there, there's no more movement. And so I think they need to figure out where they are most effective, what has been effective, the whole self-scouting thing, maybe scrap some things. And I think 11 on 11 between the hashes in the box is something that is so outdated that to try it again or to trot it out with guys who have really, there's probably maybe a couple of offensive linemen who have done that, but it just didn't, stuff like that I didn't like, and I would avoid it, but work on that short yardage stuff, figure out what works best, find the guy that you like best doing it. Maybe it's Chip, whatever, but make it become a strength and work on it and, rep it and all of these things and build some confidence, because I wonder how much confidence they have right now with short yardage. They can say all of the right things, but I think Ryan Day also showed some lack of confidence in his team by throwing it, by jet sweeping it, those sort of things. That shows a lack of confidence to me in the offensive line and the ability to move and get that 1 yard.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned the show that I did with Ross, and we focused specifically on short yardage. I think we looked at 5 or 6 plays, and the only one where they got it and got it easily, where Notre Dame had 10 men on the field, was they lined up in the pistol and just ran an inside zone to Travion Henderson. And that feels like that's sort of been the bread and butter, and they've been super predictable in the pistol over the years, where that's generally a strong correlation with, hey, we're going to run the ball if they're in the pistol. But it worked, and it was the only thing that looked, we watched the Michigan game earlier in the week, and you watch Michigan just pick up these effortless 3rd and 2s, and it's just like the offensive line opens a hole, Blake Corum runs through it, and he picks up 4 yards or 3 yards, and ta-da, first down. And boy, isn't that easy. How hard can it be to pick up 2 yards against a crappy defense? Well, not as hard as Ohio State makes it look. And Notre Dame is not a crappy defense, but they've played plenty of crappy defenses and still not exactly succeeded a bunch this year. So yeah, I'm right there with you on the offensive side of the ball. Short yardage is the glaring weakness. And, you have to have Marvin Harris on the field. You have to have Emeka Egbuka on the field. You don't have to throw it, but if you have the opposing team constantly double teaming Marvin Harrison, and in some cases also doubling Emeka Egbuka, having a safety over top of those guys, or at least, have that make the linebacker have to take 2 steps out. So he helps kind of cut off the slant in that sort of short yardage situation. Whatever you have to do, don't just allow them to just cram everyone in the middle. Because you have all these blockers. Guess what? They have everyone in there too. So that to me feels like you have to be smart enough to recognize that Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka draw a bunch of attention, and either they're going to draw one or more than one person, or, well, you can throw them the ball pretty darn easily, can't you? So that feels like an easy solution, and something that they need to look into. But yeah, I think you want to look at running more of that stuff out of the pistol, because they get that nice downhill run. That feels like that suits Travion Henderson pretty well. Inside zone is something they have run reasonably well in the past. So yeah, I would be looking at that. How about the defensive side of the ball?
I think the run defense was a concern against Notre Dame. It has not been a concern against anybody else. Indiana rushed for 71 yards. Youngstown State, 99 yards, 3 yards a carry. Western Kentucky, 80 yards. But they handled things. And so is the run defense against Notre Dame the real run defense of this team? And if so, that's a little bit of a concern. It was not the best game, as we said, for the linebacker. So figure out why that was. Get them back to being a more disciplined duo, Steel Chambers and Tommy Eichenberg. And I mean, the way it went, it certainly looked like Steel Chambers got sat down for a bit. And when that happens, then something needs to be fixed. And he's been really good through most of his time at Ohio State, and this was not one of his best moments. So just take care of that, get that situated. And really, what else? The pass rush everybody wants to see that get home. Sure, it does look like, Sam Hartman certainly at times, he was also pressured at times. I think it's difficult to sack a fifth-year starting quarterback with a good offensive line because they do feel things. They can get rid of things. They get rid of the ball quickly. So that is tougher. But what is the more pressing issue, Tom? Not to take your answer, but I don't think the run defense is an issue, but the way we saw it on Saturday is a concern. I don't know that the pass rush is an issue, but we also haven't seen it just demolish anybody yet either.
No, we haven't. And I think the run defense is a little bit of a concern because when you're looking at the Michigan game coming up, what is Michigan going to try and do? They're going to try and pound the ball on the ground, two backs probably at times. Who does Michigan love to throw to, Tony? Is it the tight end? I bet it's the tight end. Guess who ate Ohio State's lunch at times on Saturday? Hey, it was the tight end. So I think there's a lot of stuff from that game that you could sort of spin forward to the Saturday after Thanksgiving and is stuff you're going to want to keep an eye on. I'm not expecting, I don't know that how much of that is directly applicable to Maryland or Purdue coming up, but that's all stuff you want to I think, keep an eye on. The other thing that you didn't mention there, and it's sort of related to the pass rush, is if JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer are playing every snap against Notre Dame, and Notre Dame is running these long, extended drives, those guys are going to wear down. That is not, and that's not the sole cause of every issue is the defense was tired, but those guys are going to wear down. There's a reason Larry Johnson has historically rotated his defensive line. I think you got to work on getting Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson to the point where you can at least have them come in and spell those guys for a drive or half a drive or the start of a drive. And if it gets to midfield, then you put JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer back in. Like whatever it is, you got to have a little bit more depth. They rotated. I think we would probably have guessed that they were going to rotate the starting two defensive ends more than the starting two linebackers at Notre Dame, and it was completely the opposite. As you said, Cody Simon came in for Steel Chambers for at least a drive in each half, and then the starting defensive ends just played the whole game. So I think you got to work to develop those young defensive ends because you have to be able to rely on them because sometimes guys get hurt. Sometimes guys get tired. You can that is not, just play the two guys who are the starters for every snap against Wisconsin, Penn State, Michigan, potential Big Ten championship game, potential college football playoff game. That's not a viable strategy. So you got to get to the point where you're comfortable with some of those younger guys in there as well.
Yeah, I was very surprised. Not that those two played more, but that they played the entire time. And this wasn't a situation where Notre Dame is running up tempo and Ohio State didn't have any opportunities to substitute because Notre Dame was happy to run the clock and Ohio State could have gotten guys out there. But I think it just shows you the size of the game, the fear of having a young player ruin everything, that sort of thing. I mean, that's obvious. That's why you're not putting certain guys out there because you don't want them to screw things up. And you need your best players to play at their best in the biggest games. And so you go with the guys that you trust more because any play in that game could have been the play that ends it more so than wins it. You know what I'm saying? Like one bad play is all it takes and the game is over. And so they're just trying to avoid that. And if it's dealing with a 75% JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer, so be it. And by the end of that, in that fourth quarter, they were probably at about 75%, 70% as you're watching Notre Dame just run the ball until they decided not to for some reason.
Yeah, that, one key for Ohio State, keep having the opposing coaching staff do things that are not smart. That's, that was a huge key to the game on Saturday. Not running Caden Curry or Kenyatta Jackson on at some point. Not the most egregious example of not running a defensive end on when you maybe could have during the course of that game. So yeah, that's don't worry, Ohio State fans. It could always be worse. Next up from at CBusBuck 614, he's got a couple here. First one, is Wisconsin a worry equal to Penn State this year? This one to me, Tony, feels like the answer is clearly no, based just on the on-field results right now. This feels like sort of a transition year for Wisconsin, with Luke Fickell, Phil Longo coming in to run the offense and a much more pass-centric offense. Wisconsin just doesn't really have the horses to run that right now. it's what they want to run, but it just has not really translated. They lost at Washington State. They didn't look great for stretches against either Georgia State or Georgia Southern. I'm going to get those two confused forever. Sorry. It feels like this is a little bit of a transition year, and they might be at the point where they're kind of figuring out, we might have to lean on Braylon Allen more than we thought before. But Wisconsin, just personnel wise, I don't think is as much of a challenge as Penn State. I think I saw Ohio State was going to be a 14 or 17 point favorite against Wisconsin if they met in the Big Ten championship game. The only thing that gives me a little pause there, Tony, is Wisconsin comes right on the schedule after Notre Dame right after Penn State. Sorry. And when you look at, the end of that Notre Dame game, how, battered and bruised some of the Ohio State players are, just the emotional come down of that game, and they wanted to enjoy that one a little bit. If you beat Penn State this year, it's probably going to be fairly similar, but instead of a week off, you got to get on an airplane the following week and go to Madison, which is always a sort of hostile place and always a place where, that is a loud crowd. If Wisconsin can sort of stay in the game and get off to a decent start, that crowd's going to be in it. That crowd's going to be a factor. And that's just, back-to-back weeks, we have seen Ohio State have the big win and then have to go travel to a Big Ten West team and then just fall flat on their butts. That I think is the only thing that is a concern to me there. Personnel-wise, Penn State is a far bigger concern to me than Wisconsin.
Yeah, but there is just something about Camp Randall, and this will likely be a night game. We remember the 2003 game. Ohio State went in there as the number 3 team in the nation. They were a 2.5 point favorite over the number 23 Wisconsin Badgers. End up losing that one 17-10. And a bunch of crazy events in that game. We remember Lee Evans getting by Chris Gamble on an out and up, but there was some other crazy stuff that went on in that one. Of course, 2010, Ohio State goes in to Wisconsin as the number 1 team, as if just a 3.5 point favorite against number 18 Wisconsin. So you even look at Vegas. Vegas knows that back in the Jim Tressel days, you don't want to give Ohio State too many points in these sorts of things, or take too many points away from them. That, of course, was a 31-18 win for Wisconsin. That game started with a kickoff return for a touchdown. Ohio State fights their way back, but could never really get over the top. And we've seen other games against Wisconsin that have, 2011, that one to Devin Smith to win it. The 2012 game was an overtime at Wisconsin. The 2013 game was a 7-point game. So I'm never going to overlook Wisconsin and say, it's not a tough or dangerous game where their personnel is iffy. Losing Ches Malusi, their number 2, 1A, 1B running back, probably for the season is going to hurt them. Tanner Mordecai, I think, has 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions so far this season, and he's been up and down. Georgia Southern, Tom, threw for 383 yards against Wisconsin a couple of weeks ago. Washington State threw for 246. Purdue went for 198 on the ground. So there's some defensive issues there as well. But it's Camp Randall at night, so I'm going to expect anything. It's still not as dangerous. Wisconsin is not as dangerous as Penn State. But I think the two situations may be equally as dangerous. And the good news for Ohio State is they get Penn State at home. But if the run game isn't there, it doesn't matter. And that's my biggest concern, I guess, would be Ohio State running the ball against Penn State as opposed to running it against Wisconsin.
Yeah, I think the matchup there is probably a little bit more of a concern on the Penn State side, as you said there. So I just want to go back real quickly to the 2003 game, Tony. Wisconsin came into that game with a record of 5-1. Do you remember who they lost to before that game?
Was it like a Miami of Ohio or San Jose State?
It was the San Jose State of Las Vegas, UNLV. Do you remember how many points Wisconsin scored in that UNLV game, Tony? And I'm going to give you a hint. It's a prime number.
Is it 5?
It is exactly 5 points. They lost 23-5 at home to UNLV. And then about a month later, beat Ohio State at home 17-10. Tony, that Wisconsin team had 6 games after. They were 6-1 after that Ohio State win. They had 6 games after that game. How many wins did Wisconsin pick up in those final 6 games?
2?
No, Tony, it was 1. They were 6-1 after upsetting defending national champion number 3 Ohio State. Big party in Madison. College game day came next week, and they lost at home to Purdue. And then they went on the road and lost at Northwestern. And then they went on the road and lost to Minnesota. And then they beat Michigan State 56-21. Everything was fixed until then they went to they played Iowa at home and lost. And then they played the Music City Bowl against Auburn and lost. So that team finished 7-6, 4-4 in the Big Ten. All anyone remembers, though, Tony, Lee Evans on an out and up. So, yeah, Wisconsin's a little bit like it's a little bit like a low grade Purdue, where whatever that school has done before Ohio State comes to town has no bearing whatsoever on what happens when Ohio State is in town. Ohio State hasn't been up there for years, so that'll be an interesting one. But yeah, I still think Penn State is more of a concern. Next one, Notre Dame and Indiana both had success in double covering Emeka Egbuka and Marvin Harrison Jr., possibly showing a blueprint for the rest of the Big Ten. How does Day counter that, and why does it mean that 2023 is the year of the tight end at Ohio State?
Well, nothing that Marvin Harrison could do could possibly impact the fact that this is the year of the tight end, regardless. That's like saying, what if I throw a cup of water at the sun? Am I going to put the sun out? No. It's still going to be the year of the sun. It's still going to be the year of the tight end, regardless of what some Marvin Harrison guy is doing or not doing. But we did see Emeka Egbuka with 7 catches in this one because they were bracketing Marvin Harrison. And if you want to try to double both, then that's going to leave even more things open. If you want to leave Xavier Johnson completely uncovered out of the slot, Ohio State's going to take that. It's just going to be up to Kyle McCord to see those things. And he has been seeing them for the most part, but also they're not just going to accept Marvin Harrison being double covered. They're going to continue to find ways and do things and design things and scheme things up. We all remember watching Alabama scheme things up for Devontae Smith in 2020 when he was lighting everybody up, including Ohio State. You move guys around, you find areas, you find plays that work well, that put stress on the defense in other ways, and have to basically force them to free up Marvin. But also, they didn't double Marvin every time. And when they don't, it's okay to then, you know what? Maybe I'm going to change some progressions. maybe Marvin's just going to be the guy. And I think they need to do more of that. And I don't know how much freedom Kyle McCord has for that or how much they even want that to happen. But I think there needs to be more of that. And if you actually get him single covered and that's what you want, it's okay to change things.
Well, and I think this is something that Ross pointed out to me, and this might have been off the air and not on the air, but a lot of times McCord will look at Marvin Harrison and it's his first read, and then he comes off of that first read before Harrison has a chance to get open. You might need to stick with that read a little bit longer in order to get Harrison the ball. Or even if Harrison's your first read, you're looking on the other side trying to move the safety with your eyes before you move over to Harrison, something like that. That you need to find a way to get him the ball. I don't mind kind of trying to force feed him a little bit just because he's so good that, and his ball skills are so good when the ball's in the air that, even if he's covered, the odds are better that he's going to come down with the ball than a mere mortal kind of wide receiver. So, you're not going to throw in a double coverage, but you gotta just make use of Cade Stover and Emeka Egbuka. And, if they're doubling Marvin Harrison and sometimes also doubling Emeka Egbuka, well, Julian Fleming's got to get open, and you got to be looking for Julian Fleming. You got to be looking for Cade Stover. You got to be looking for Travion Henderson out of the backfield. Whatever it is, you have other guys. Make them undouble them, and then go feed those guys the ball.
I thought it was interesting watching Al Golden, Notre Dame defensive coordinator, on maybe Tuesday or Wednesday, talking about everything they were doing on that final drive to try to confuse Kyle McCord and slow him down in terms of what he was seeing, what they were showing. Then he also talked about at the end the fear of a 50-50 ball being thrown to Marvin Harrison. Like you're more scared of this than like anything else. And that's the kind of fear that defensive players, defensive coordinators have with that guy, and for good reason. So when you do get those opportunities, feel free to attack them. But it's just interesting to watch him say, like, almost as if like the one thing we didn't want to have happen, them throwing up a 50-50 ball in the end zone to Marvin Harrison. And meanwhile, anybody who's ever watched football is like, that should never be your number one option. But it was almost like the number one concern for defensive coordinator, because it's not a 50-50 ball. It's closer to an 80-20 ball.
Yeah. If the opposing defensive coordinator is going, whatever you do, don't let them throw it to Marvin Harrison, that you, as the opposing coach, should say, if they don't want to see that, well, maybe this is what we should be doing more. And again, you don't want to throw into double coverage, but, when Ryan Day got to Ohio State, wanted Jeff Hafley to run the single high defense because that's what Ryan Day hated to see as an offensive coordinator. So kind of the same thing. If this is what the opposing defensive coordinator is saying, no, anything but that, that's probably something you should be doing more. So, all right, we're going to skip ahead since we're running very long on some of these other questions. We're going to get just to at DJK24129. We're going to end, Tony, with a really hard-hitting question. Mm-hmm. Get the Pulitzer ready. What's up with players having mouthpieces dangling from their face mask? At Notre Dame, Marv had a red mouthpiece at his mouth and a green one hanging down. Why? How is the flipping and flopping not annoying or distracting? This has confounded me for years. Okay, so Tony, I did some digging. I went back through my photos from the game and looked to see, did Marvin Harrison really have two separate mouthpieces? Answer, no. He had a green mouthpiece, which he indeed did not have in his mouth very much, but he did the red thing that you probably thought was a mouthpiece was the chin strap. That's just kind of the big chin strap, cup that goes on your chin. So that is not a second mouthpiece. There are a bunch of guys who just have the mouthpiece but don't put it in. There are other guys who play without a mouthpiece. It's not, I guess, required. JT Tuimoloau, for example, did not have a mouthpiece in for a bunch of the game. Did not have one hanging off of his face mask. There's some guys who do. Xavier Johnson, every time I looked at a Xavier Johnson picture from the game, he had his mouthpiece in. It just kind of depends on the guy. Kyle McCord does not have this in because he has to call signals. So it just kind of depends. I don't know. I have looked at that at some point and thought, okay, the wide receivers don't have their mouthpieces in, so they're not running routes here. And, is this some kind of a tip-off, like a pitcher tipping pitches that, hey, I'm going to put my mouthpiece in if I know I'm going to get hit. I'm going to go over the middle. I'm going to put my mouthpiece in. I haven't found any real correlation to that over the years. So I think the answer, Tony, very satisfying, is I don't know.
Maybe they take the mouthpiece out when they're going to talk some junk to the corners and they just want to be able to enunciate and be heard. That's when oh, here it comes. No mouthpiece. So, Tom, thank you for the investigation, the investigative journalism, if you will. Always appreciate that. First time ever in this show. Although earlier I started the show by telling us, I went back and looked at box scores from the last 4 weeks. So kind of nice bookends of research for this. Don't ever expect that again on any of these questions and answers.
I can't see your back, but I don't see a cape. So I'm going to report with decent authority that not all heroes wear capes. But I can't tell you that for sure.
I'm just assume. But anyway, I want to thank you all for tuning in. We'll have more questions for the next show later in the week as well. And we always do appreciate you guys submitting stuff and helping us out. Want to invite you all over to BuckeyeHuddle.com. Now is a great time to become a member. Plenty of stuff going on. As you know, even though it's bye week, there's still plenty of recruiting, plenty of team talk and things like that on the message board. Also find us at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. If you're watching this right now, go ahead and hit the like button. If you have not subscribed, please do so as well. Go ahead and hit the bell to be notified when we go live or drop new videos like this one, or interviews on random Wednesdays. We go live as well at times. So I want to thank you all for doing all of that as always. And of course, if you're listening on the podcast platform, throw us a 5-star review. That always helps. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.